Hi everyone, my name's Rachael Malthouse. I am part of the team of JamUp. JamUp is a digital tool and app which helps children with additional needs, including autism, better manage life skills and daily tasks. You can download it from www.jamup.io or via the app stores. We've got Chris Wade here with us today. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Chris Wade. I'm a speech therapist working independently.
Thanks,
That's
Chris. And we're just going to ask you a few questions today that some of our parents have been asking us to directly ask you. So the first is we just want to understand a bit more about the role of speech and language therapists. So could you tell us about how speech and language therapists might help support children's kind of communication at home or and maybe at school?
absolutely. So when we think about communication, it's an interesting one. So the old way we used to talk about communication is thinking about a pyramid. Okay, so think about that pyramid. We've got different levels of that pyramid, and the foundation for working on communication skills, but also linking it in with cognitive skills, was as a child's attention and listening skills. So you start by working on their attention, their joint attention, so developing their attention level so that they're able to kind of filter out what's happening in the background and focus on things with you as an adult or with other children. The next stage we always talked about was working on the receptive language skills. That's the child's understanding of language. So you can imagine within a classroom or at home, we often start with quite simple instructions, then we move to much more complex ones. So from just show me your nose, where are your eyes, where are your ears, to can you get me the remote from mum's room? And then we look at kind of expressive language skills. So expressive language skills for a young one might be looking at the way that they use single words, to looking at short phrases, to being able to, as they get older, use language to report on past events, so their narrative skills. Um, and then the bit on the top was always the speech intelligibilities. That's how clear someone's language is. And then all the way up the side, you've got the development of the side of the pyramid, you've got the development of social interaction, social communication skills. And then that pyramid got kind of squashed into a bit of a line and then changed into another shape in that we've got different ways to, when we look at kind of neurodivergent profiles, we look at how the different aspects of that pyramid might develop at very different rates and all be valid at the same time. So now we look more holistically at children. So when we're looking at a neurodivergent child, I won't necessarily look at particular social interaction, social communication skills, but I look more functionally at their how they use language to request assistance or identify that they're finding something difficult or to talk about their emotions. Um, so that's kind of broadly what we do. So as speech therapists, we should be able to work on each aspect of that kind of pyramid or whatever shape it's turned into, um, and kind of look at functionally how to develop those skills in young people, adolescents, and adults. And that will be within a range of settings from the home and the community, but also in placements such as school. Sorry, my answers are always going to be long-winded and go off on random tangents. So
No, that's great. Thanks, Chris. I'm just wondering what kinds of communication needs might be common for a neurodivergent child, and how might you help? Yeah.
A lot of the work I do, so I've been qualified 18 years. For the whole 18 years, I've worked with autistic kids. So autistic kids, what we know about children that are autistic, there's often a comorbid diagnosis of ADHD as well. And for some children, they might have different types of profiles in terms of communication. The kind of what's quite new in terms of terminology that's being used by families and by schools and also speech therapists is this idea of kind of gestalt language processing. So it's a different kind of different terminology to look at how we might develop a child's or their profile and how it's developed, their language and communication skills are developed. So if I think about broadly in terms of autism, my role as a speech therapist might to start with be looking at the child's ability to listen out for their name and when their name is called, kind of look towards that person or kind of shift their kind of attention towards the person that's calling their name. It might be developing their early communication skills. It's just their ability to comment on what they see, request things that they want. So it might be introducing communication support, and this might be using visual aids, it might be using printed out laminated pictures. It might be using iPads. So looking at ways of the kind of augmenting that child's communication skills so they can access the world. Um, as they get older, things that I tend to work with will be if they're a child that's using verbal language, it'll be to expand on that verbal language from a functional perspective. So for some children, they might use one or two word sentences. So it's starting to add a little bit of grammar here and there into those sentences. So they start to understand the impact that their sentences have on others so that they can start to direct others or um, kind of make more kind of more complex requests. So you might have a child that at the moment I mean, a good example is a child that's currently asking for what are those Skittles. So they might be like, oh, they might start with the word Skittles. And then they might be like, oh, can I have more Skittles or more Skittles? And then they might be like, actually, I really like the red Skittles. So we need to introduce the extra vocabulary. So I want two red Skittles, or can I have two more red Skittles? So from a functional perspective, it's helping that child kind of navigate the world and expand on the language that they have, whether it's verbal, whether it's using a communication device, in order to be able to access things and kind of uh, yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
went my brain went off somewhere else. And I guess the other aspect is a lot of children that I've assessed that are autistic have difficulties with their narrative skills. So that's retelling on past events.
Yeah.
So developing their ability to sequence pictures and tell stories using visuals so that their sentences connect with other sentences so they can tell a longer account or something. Schools are really good at this. So they're in a morning, usually on a Monday morning, all the children come in and they talk about what they did over the weekend. Some of the support that we try and push into schools and we get teachers think about is how they can introduce those visual supports. So for an
Yeah.
autistic child, and actually for lots of children, talking about what they did on Saturday, unless it was this amazing thing, they're going to forget what they did. So we often encourage families to send in photographs or videos. So there's that visual element that the child can kind of use as a scaffolding or to kind of anchor themselves so they can talk about what happened in the picture and then link that to that past event. Other things that we might work with the children that are autistic is their ability to follow instructions or their ability to listen to information and retain that information and act on the information, whether that's following instructions or engaging in conversation with others. From a kind of a neuroaffirming perspective, that's where the speech therapist comes in as well.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, my son's got a like a photo book of happy things that he really likes, and he finds that a really good way of like being able to talk to people about what he's got in the book as well. So I can see how that fits in with what you're saying about using visuals and things.
Yeah, when I worked with that, sorry, when I worked with adults, autistic adults in the community, one of the first things we introduced was what we call an All About Me book, which is very similar.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
might be a collection of photos of things that are important to that person. Because often adults that are in the community, unless they're living with their parents, they're going to be living in supported living or maybe potentially nursing type homes, in which you've got lots and lots of frequent kind of changes of staff. So
Yeah.
what we put in place would be a photo, like a really kind of detailed photo album with descriptions of who were in the pictures and what they were doing, so
Yeah.
that the person that's that person's communication partner can look at that album with the person or look at individual pictures and say, "Oh, there's Frank, and Frank, you went for an ice cream with Frank," or whatever that event might be. Because visuals really help with anchoring us and kind of getting us to kind of support that engagement with people.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, another question is around following on from what you were saying really earlier, is about how can we help our children kind of express their emotions or maybe ask for help more efficiently. So tell us if they're feeling angry, scared, sad, so that we understand more about what's happening. I find that really difficult.
Oh, definitely. So, I mean, if I think about my own child, so my eldest, when she needs help about with something, that's when her language skills often deteriorate
Mm.
significantly. So, when you're anxious, we've got the kind of the interplay of potential mutism, so situational mutism. So, children that are hyper anxious about something might not be able to access their words at all. So there's a few different approaches. I mean, I guess the old school approach might be using things like Makaton. So really simple signs to request help. The difficulty with Makaton is, and again with British Sign Language as well, is you need a conversational partner that understands what that means when you're doing the sign. So the sign for help is this, and it's kind of help me, and it's such a difficult sign to for other people to understand. So then we start to look at, okay, what other visual strategies? If someone can't access their voice, what other strategies can we use? For other people, I worked with a young person with situational mutism last week during an assessment,
Mhm.
and they were using pen and paper. So when they couldn't access their voice to give me the answers or to respond, they would write down. And then I said, actually, you're getting quite tired. Why don't we try something else? So then we got the iPhone out and we use predictive text on the iPhone. Again, that can then be another way to augment that young person's communication. And then as we get more technical, we can look at pieces of software. There's a software called Predictable, and Predictable will using that person's previous communication can predict what they might want to talk about next. Similar to how the iPhone works, but the iPhone looks at it from more from a grammar and a information perspective, whereas Predictable as an AAC software, so alternative augmentative communication software, will start to learn from what you've talked about previously. So it adds a bit more personalization in. Um, I guess other things that we look at are things like zones of regulation. So occupational therapists and teachers often kind of bring in zones of regulation. So that's where each type of emotion is related to, I think it's one of three different colors. And therefore you've got children that might be feeling one color and they might want to feel a different color because they don't have the particular vocabulary to talk about their emotions. So we using zones of regulation, you'll be teaching a child that when you're feeling X, so when you're feeling this color, to make yourself feel a little bit better and feel this color, hey, here's an activity that works for you. That might be going for a walk, reading a book, listening to music, taking yourself out of the situation. And I guess the other thing is looking at the fact that autistic children often have alexithymia, so that's that difficulty in relating a particular word for so from an emotional perspective, relating a particular word for an emotion to how that physically manifests. So
Yeah.
not being able to make that connection between the two. So as an example, my eldest, when she's bored, when she's scared, she might say she's bored, for example. And in her head, that emotional language doesn't correlate to how the physical kind of manifestation is. So it's kind of supporting that child in understanding what vocabulary they need to use to describe how they're physically feeling. It's so complex. And
Yeah.
it's so, and that's the key here. It's so personalized, and there's lots of different approaches. And I often find there isn't just one approach for any of these kids. And as a parent, I have to think about zones of regulation. I have to think about the 5 point scale. I have to think about how I use AAC. I have to think about my own language. I have to think about the understanding of that young person in kind of the holistic understanding of that young person, rather than thinking this is going to be the catch-all support for all these children. I think that's why having speech therapists and parents, occupational therapists, psychologists, all working together in a dream situation together around that one child, you can start to put that bespoke package together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's hard as a parent sometimes when you're in the middle of it all to really be able to understand what's actually going on. And it just takes a lot of it just takes time, I think, as well. But you kind of know your child best, don't you? So quite often you do, what your instincts are probably probably right. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I think what
Like,
I found, and I listened to a really good podcast. I'm rubbish at remembering what podcast I've listened to, but the recent one I listened to, they talked about how the error we make as parents is often that we will try and look at a behavior in the middle of that behavior happening.
mm,
So my youngest at the moment, 5 years old, doesn't want to go into school at the moment, and it's like a mirror of what her friend is doing. I'm like, okay, you're doing this because of your friend, but you're still valid that you don't want to go into school. So you're getting upset at that point. Trying to rationalize with somebody at the point of them feeling anxious or scared or distressed is not going to work. So it's thinking about, okay, this is what the behavior we're seeing. This is that distress, these difficulties that we're seeing in terms of emotions. And then thinking, okay, once that person regulates themselves at a later point, let's return to that and talk about, okay, what happened there. Let's talk about what might have other people be thinking at that point, and what we might want to change in the future. And things like comic strip conversations are quite good for this. So you draw out the individual aspects of what you think you saw as the adult, and you talk it through with that young child, I mean, of 5, for example, and above, and talk about what they were feeling, what other people saw when they saw them behaving in that way, or whatever they did. And you can kind of then link that into kind of more of a personalized kind of social story as to, okay, this is how it was, and this is how you felt, this is how other people felt, this is what you said, this is what you did, this is what they did. In the future, let's try and do it this way, because then the outcome might be more positive, for example. Again, absolutely tailored, because that's what's usually required.
Oh, thanks. That's great. We've had a few questions from parents who have got children or young people with a PDA or pathological demand avoidance profile. And they've been sort of asking about, sort of saying if they ask their child to do something, it seems to place a demand on them. So they'll say no straight away. So do you have any sort of strategies of how you can maybe like phrase requests or instructions in ways that might feel less demanding for children and young people?
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about demand avoidance, if I step away from kind of the term pathological demand avoidance, then I think, okay, what's happening for that young person when we're placing a demand on them? And I think if I think about my own, it's easier for me to think of it as a father rather than a speech therapist. So the demand I want to put on my eldest is to make me a cup of tea. Okay, this is the difficult one because I say no, a cup of tea is rubbish. Cup of coffee because they're an absolute whiz at doing these special coffees that they see in Starbucks and things. So I were if rather than me saying, "Oh, can you make me a cup of tea or make me a cup of coffee?" I know that the response to that is going to be no, not a chance. And it's mainly coming from a position of autonomy and then wanting to have control in what they're doing. In their mind, they might be like, "So I want to go play Roblox, I want to play 99 Nights, I want to do anything other than doing what you need me to do. However, I want to be kind at the same time. I want to do something nice for my parent, but I've got that internal battle between what I want to do, what you want to do, and the expectation you've suddenly put on me. So I will use quite indirect language, which isn't typical for what you would use for an autistic person usually, because usually we talk about when we use kind of indirect language, it's not clear. So usually for an autistic person, I might say, "Oh, I'd really like a cup of tea. I'd really like a cup of tea with 2 sugars in. I'd really like you to make me a cup of tea with 2 sugars in." And it's really clear. So for some children, that's that really clear example of what's expected of them, and they just crack on and go do it. So for one of my children, that's exactly what they will do. For my other child, I have to skate around it, and I'll be like, "Oh, I'm so thirsty. Oh, I've not had a drink for ages. Oh, I would absolutely love a drink." And then help them slowly come to the realization that I'm actually not being really annoying and trying to skirt around it. I want you to do something for me. So that sometimes works as a strategy. Other times, if I'm thinking about when we put in a much larger demand on them, such as doing their homework, it might be things like asking them, "Oh, I wonder what your teacher set for you to do today. I wonder what's in that maths lesson. I wonder if we can just have a look at what was in that maths lesson, see if there's anything that needs to be done." So kind of again, it's using that less direct, have you done your homework? What time are you doing your homework? Can you go sit at the table and do your homework? Really direct instructions or declaratives. Kind of thinking about it in a way that you're kind of saying, okay, there's some, rather than directing you, I'm kind of directing your thoughts towards that event, but I'm not trying to get you to do it. The other thing I use a lot in all my assessments and also in therapy is I use a lot of humor. I'm very kind of chilled in the way that I tend to run assessments. In that I will use a lot of therapy, but also talk to children's pets more than I might talk to the child. So if there's a dog in the room, I'll spend a lot of time fussing over the dog. and positioning myself. And I think positioning is quite interesting, is that I'll position myself usually where I can on a lower level than the child is. So they're looking down at me at the same time. So these little tweaks in terms of kind of adjusting the power dynamics in therapy and assessments, and also when you're expecting something from them, is really important. I guess that last bit, so I am going to keep going. The last bit is I tend to think about what that young person might want from me. What is their intrinsically what they want? So for us at the moment, it's jelly cats, like absolutely obsessed with jelly cats, and therefore, um, I will, I'll kind of have that in mind when I'm indirectly making requests, that I've got something in mind that motivates that person to do what I want them to do. Without it being blackmail and like, if you do this, you will get this. It might be like, oh yeah, I mean, we've got a bit of homework to do, but also after that, should we have a look at what's on the Jellycat shop? Should we see what sort of budget we might have for potentially getting a Jellycat in the future? Again, not really committing, kind of giving that kind of choice of there's a bit of work, but then there's a reward related to that.
Oh, great. How many jelly cats have you got?
There's a lot downstairs. I think 15 to 20 at the moment. Yes,
Wow.
it's a problem. It was squishmallows to start with, and squishmallows I could deal with because squishmallows range from like £5 to £15. Jellycats are a lot more. So trying to navigate back to squishmallows is my target this year.
The final question, and we've only got sort of 2 or 3 minutes, if that's all right, just to answer this one, is how would you decide whether a child would benefit from communication aids?
So the way that it used to happen is quite interesting. So we used to have to. So if we look at AAC, so alternative and augmentative communication, there used to be kind of a set pathway in which we would then start at level one and work up through those levels of the child and look for competence at each levels. And this competence thing, this communicative competence, is this buzzword that we're always being used in speech therapy. Um, and what you'd end up doing is you'd have a child that might start on a communication board, or they might have started on picture exchange communication system, so PECs, or they might have started with no communication boards or visuals and just Makaton, for example. And the expectation was that they would develop a bit of a prowess in that skill and move up through that skill, to develop their competence so that you could then move them on to the next level. I guess the highest level was always high-tech communication aids for a lot of these children. So that was always the target. We kind of had to prove constantly that a child needed to be able to differentiate between pictures or symbols or objects, and be able to put those into a sentence, be able to make choices, and you kind of there's this kind of framework which actually stopped people from accessing a kind of high-tech AAC. And a lot of that's been turned on its head, especially with just out language processing, because the evidence around GLP is that we introduce high-tech dynamic communication systems, from a very, very young age. So we've got young children that might have been stuck on paper-based communication for 2 to 3 years or longer, or never get to high tech. Now being introduced high tech immediately, which again has its pros and cons, because high tech is the battery's going to die at some point. So or have to be complete in the ball as a parent or as a teacher, that you get it charged for the time the child's not using it. Technology is quite heavy at times. So you've got children that would have to carry their own iPads or carry their own communication devices or their own iPhones, and they'd have to bring it with them wherever they go. I guess your limitations around AAC is that, but you think about activities that kids love to do, which is tend to be outside, tend to be muddy, tend to be kind of quite high sensory, or going to the swimming pool, going to the beach. These are sort of places you don't really want an expensive communication device to be at, or it needs to be heavily protected. So there's a lot of there's a lot of barriers there, but in my opinion, and I think I mean, it seems to be the general trend in speech therapy now, is that we push for high-tech alternative augmentative communication. and we try it. And again, there's so much to be said about trial and error with children. And we try an app and we're like, okay, is it working really well? What's it contributing to that child's life? Is it making them more stressed, etc.? And we kind of ignore that whole thing of they need to be at X level on PECs or X level on a communication board or using a communication book or using a pod system. We stopped with that, swapped it to, okay, let's see how they get on with AAC, with the support of a speech therapist and integrate it within the classroom, etc. So yes, I hope that was that was another long-winded answer, but I think we got there.
No, that was great, Chris. Thank you. Thanks so much. And yeah, thank you very much for your time today. If anyone wants to find out more about JamUp, please do visit our website at www.jamup.io. And yeah, we will speak to you soon, Chris. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you.